In the late 15th century, the edges of the known world trembled with curiosity and ambition. This was the dawn of the Age of Exploration, a time when nations peered beyond their horizons, driven by dreams of wealth, glory, and discovery. The medieval world had long been stitched together by overland routes, ancient roads where merchants, pilgrims, and ideas traveled for centuries. But those paths were fraught with peril, taxed by empires, and threatened by the shifting tides of war and politics. The promise of the East, its gold, its silks, its spices, beckoned to the restless minds of Europe. Yet, locked behind the walls of the Ottoman Empire and Arab intermediaries, the riches of Asia seemed tantalizingly out of reach. It was in this crucible of ambition and innovation that the Portuguese, a small kingdom on the Atlantic's western edge, set their gaze on the sea. They dreamed of carving a new path, one that would bypass the land empires and bring them directly to the fabled markets of India. And standing at the helm of this bold vision was a man whose name would echo through the centuries, Vasco da Gama. Vasco da Gama was born around 1460, some say 1469, in the coastal town of Sines, Portugal. He entered the world at a pivotal moment, as the fires of exploration were being kindled across the Iberian Peninsula. His family was noble, with deep roots in service to the Portuguese crown. His father, Estevão da Gama, was a respected knight, an embodiment of the chivalric values that defined the era. From an early age, Vasco was immersed in the rhythms of the sea and the calculations of navigation. Portugal, under the influence of Prince Henry the Navigator, had become a cradle of maritime innovation. The compass, the astrolabe, and the caravel, these were the tools that Portuguese sailors used to push deeper into the Atlantic, probing Africa's coastline and dreaming of distant shores. Young Vasco's education was shaped by this spirit. He learned mathematics, astronomy, and the art of reading the stars. The stories of mariners returning from the edge of the world filled his imagination, and the salt air of Sines seemed to whisper questions that only the open sea could answer. Yet behind the romance of exploration lay cold calculation. The Ottoman Turks controlled the land routes to Asia, and their power was growing. Every shipment of pepper, cinnamon, or silk that reached Europe had passed through a gauntlet of taxes, tolls, and middlemen. The Portuguese crown, hungry for wealth and eager for prestige, resolved to break this monopoly. They would find a sea route to India or perish in the attempt. In 1497, King Manuel I of Portugal took a decisive step. He appointed Vasco da Gama to lead an expedition unlike any before, a voyage that would circle Africa and reach the Indian subcontinent by sea. The motivations were clear: seize the spice trade, challenge the Muslim merchants who dominated the Indian Ocean, and claim a place among the great powers of the world. The preparations for this historic journey were meticulous. 4 ships were readied for the voyage: the São Gabriel and São Rafael, sturdy naws built for long ocean crossings; the Berrio, a nimble caravel; and a supply ship to carry provisions. Crews were selected for their skill and their courage, for many would never return. Provisions were loaded: barrels of fresh water, salted meat, hardtack, and wine. Charts were studied, prayers were said, and the sails were hoisted. On July 8, 1497, Vasco da Gama and his fleet departed from Lisbon, the Tagus River slipping away behind them as they sailed into the unknown. The first leg took them to Cape Verde, off the western coast of Africa. From there, they turned south, hugging the uncharted coasts and battling unpredictable currents. The journey was perilous. Storms lashed the ships as they rounded the Cape of Good Hope, the southern tip of Africa where the Atlantic and Indian Oceans collide in a fury of wind and waves. After weeks of hardship, the fleet emerged on the east coast of Africa. They stopped in present-day Mozambique, then sailed north to Mombasa and Malindi, navigating a world of unfamiliar customs and languages. In Malindi, fate smiled on the expedition. Vasco da Gama secured the services of a skilled Arab navigator, Ahmed ibn Majid, as some sources suggest, whose knowledge of the monsoon winds would prove invaluable. With his guidance, the fleet crossed the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean, charting a course that no European had ever taken. On May 20th, 1498, after more than 10 months at sea, Vasco da Gama's ships anchored off the coast of Calicut, now called Kozhikode, on the southwestern shore of India. For the first time, Europe had a direct sea link to the fabled markets of the East. The arrival of the Portuguese astonished the local rulers and merchants. The Zamorin of Calicut, the region's powerful leader, received da Gama with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The city was a cosmopolitan hub where Arab, Persian, Chinese, and Indian traders mingled in the pursuit of profit. The Portuguese, with their strange language and foreign customs, were outsiders in every sense. Negotiations began, but quickly soured. The gifts that da Gama presented, cloth, hats, and trinkets, were a far cry from the gold and jewels the Zamorin expected from foreign envoys. Cultural misunderstandings abounded, and the Arab merchants, wary of new rivals, stoked the fires of distrust. The Portuguese struggled to make headway, and after months of fruitless talks, da Gama prepared to depart. Though the expedition managed to secure a modest cargo of spices, the true treasure of the voyage was something far more valuable, proof that a sea route to India was possible. Armed with this knowledge, Vasco da Gama set sail for home. The return journey was as grueling as the outbound leg. Scurvy ravaged the crew, storms battered the ships, and many men perished before the battered fleet limped back into Lisbon in 1499. Vasco da Gama's homecoming was triumphant. He was hailed as a hero, his name whispered in awe across Europe. The precious spices he brought back, pepper, cinnamon, and cloves, fetched enormous prices, and the Portuguese court reveled in the promise of future riches. More importantly, da Gama had shown that an oceanic passage to Asia was not just a dream, but a reality. The stranglehold of the overland Silk Road was broken, and the stage was set for a new era of global trade. The impact of da Gama's first voyage was seismic. Portugal, once a minor kingdom on Europe's fringe, now stood at the center of a widening web of commerce and conquest. The journey had taken nearly 2 years, claimed the lives of many brave souls, and tested the limits of human endurance. But it had succeeded where all previous efforts had failed. The news sent shockwaves through Europe. The rivalry between kingdoms intensified as Spain, England, and the Netherlands all sought to carve their own empires on the distant shores of Asia. But for now, Portugal held the advantage, its ships plying the route that Vasco da Gama had pioneered. Flush with success, but wary of resistance, the Portuguese crown knew that trade alone would not secure their place in the Indian Ocean. In 1502, Vasco da Gama was dispatched once more, this time at the head of a formidable armada. The mission was clear: assert Portuguese dominance, punish those who had opposed them, and secure favorable terms by force if necessary. The second voyage was a turning point, not just for da Gama, but for the world. The fleet was heavily armed, bristling with cannon and carrying hundreds of soldiers. Where the first expedition had been a tentative foray, the second was an unmistakable show of power. Arriving once again in Calicut, da Gama demanded submission. When the Zamorin refused, the Portuguese bombarded the city, unleashing a devastating barrage that left a lasting scar. Da Gama's actions set the tone for the future. Trade would be secured at the point of a sword, and the Portuguese would not hesitate to use force to achieve their aims. The Indian Ocean, once dominated by Arab and Indian merchants, now echoed with the thunder of European cannon. The balance of power was shifting, and Vasco da Gama was at the vanguard of this new order. For his services, da Gama was richly rewarded. He was granted the title Count of Vidigueira, lands and privileges befitting his achievements. Yet, for all his honors, Vasco da Gama remained a man of action. In 1524, as the Portuguese Empire in India was beset by corruption and intrigue, he was called upon once more, this time as viceroy. His task was to restore order, root out graft, and reassert royal authority. Da Gama sailed for India for the final time, arriving in Cochin, modern-day Kochi, where he set about his work with characteristic vigor. But time and distance had taken their toll. That December, Vasco da Gama fell ill and died, far from the land of his birth. He was buried in St. Francis Church in Kochi, though his remains would later be returned to Portugal. Vasco da Gama's legacy is vast, marked by both triumph and controversy. His voyages opened the gateway to European colonization in Asia, marking the birth of the Portuguese Empire in the East. Fortresses and trading posts sprang up along the coasts of Africa, India, and beyond, as the Portuguese established a network of commerce and control. The spices of the East now flowed directly into European markets, transforming cuisines, economies, and societies. But the price of this transformation was high. The arrival of the Portuguese heralded a new era of conflict, exploitation, and cultural upheaval. Local rulers were displaced, ancient trading systems disrupted, and violence became a common currency. In Portugal, da Gama is remembered as a hero, a visionary who propelled his nation onto the world stage. In parts of India and East Africa, his name evokes memories of aggression and colonial domination. Yet, there is no denying the magnitude of his achievement. Vasco da Gama's voyage changed global trade, maritime routes, and the very fabric of world history. The sea route to India became the backbone of a new era of globalization, an era that saw goods, people, and ideas flow across continents with unprecedented speed and scale. The reverberations of his journey are still felt today, in the patterns of trade, the blending of cultures, and the enduring connections between East and West. Vasco da Gama's journey was more than just a voyage. It was a turning point in history. An event that connected two worlds across a vast ocean. His courage, tenacity, and skill opened horizons that seemed impossible. But his story also serves as a reminder that exploration and empire are often entwined with conflict, misunderstanding, and loss. As we reflect on the life and legacy of Vasco da Gama, we see a man who embodied the spirit of his age, restless, ambitious, and unafraid to challenge the limits of the possible. His contributions to navigation, trade, and world history are immense, but so too are the complexities and controversies that surround his name. History is shaped by those bold enough to venture into the unknown. Vasco da Gama's name lives on, not just in textbooks, but in the currents of the seas he conquered, in the bustling ports of the Indian Ocean, and in the ever-shifting tides of human ambition and endeavor. If you've been inspired by this story of courage and exploration, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth stories of explorers who changed the world. The age of discovery is far from over, and there are always new horizons to explore.